Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to really take a long, hard look at the New York Giants and admit some hard truths about the direction this franchise is going, especially following their latest loss, a 35-14 decision to the Baltimore Ravens. That's coming your way next here on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, credential member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI, which is where you can find my written work. And as always, welcome on in to my Blue Crew community members, my everydayers, my newcomers, and everybody in between. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And today's episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right, folks. Giants lost to the Baltimore Ravens 35-14. They were a 16.5-point underdog. We kind of knew this was going to happen. Not a surprise. It's basically been a rinse and repeat thing with the New York Giants. And, look, I feel like I talk about this every single week. Special teams was garbage once again. The Giants shot themselves in the foot with penalties and mistakes and drop passes and you name it. But look, the bottom line is they were so outmatched against the Baltimore Ravens, which we kind of knew, all right? The Giants were playing with basically a training camp roster, particularly on the defensive side of the ball, where they were missing just about every single starter in the defensive secondary except for Jason Pinnock. And you can make the argument that Jason Pinnock maybe isn't a starter on other teams. The team just looks horrible. I'm not telling you guys anything you don't already know. There was another plane that flew over the MetLife Stadium urging John Mara to make changes, fire everybody. And, just very, very little, if you're a Giant fan, to be happy about with this team. And, I'm not going to rehash, the stats and all that stuff. I mean, a lot of you know about the game. A lot of you probably read about it or saw it and whatnot. I want to talk about the bigger picture here. All right. The bigger picture is, let's go back to Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll. Now, I have done my absolute best to be supportive, to be open-minded, to try to see things for what they are. I see the injury situation, but you know what? Every team's got injuries. I see the quarterback situation. Well, why didn't that work out? And I just see so many question marks with this team that just keep popping up. They keep rearing their ugly heads. They keep undermining this team. And it gets to the point where you just say to yourself, something's got to give. They just can't keep going down this path. And, I don't know what conversations, obviously, Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll have with ownership. I don't know what they're telling them. Are they saying, oh, we're banged up, so, we don't have this, that, and the other thing. Or, oh, we don't have a starting quarterback, so that's a problem. Or, oh, we don't have, defensive line depth or offensive line depth, so we got to play guys out of position. Excuses. These are all excuses. All right, we'll start with the injury excuse. Every NFL team has injuries. The Giants are not the only team that deals with injuries. And the injuries that the Giants have suffered, yes, they have been to some of their key players. Dexter Lawrence, Andrew Thomas, Bobby Okereke, Tyler Nubin. Yes, I get all that. And it's not, the number of injuries. It is to the quality of the players that are getting injured. That's what's the determining factor. But you know what? If you have depth that is ready to step in, and should be ready to step in, you should theoretically not have that big of a drop-off when it comes to injuries. And that's where I tend to have a little bit of a problem with the coaching staff. Because when you have that big of a drop-off from, let's say, the cornerbacks, okay? This week, Deontay Banks, Cordell Flott, both sidelined again. So your starting cornerbacks were Art Green and Adoree Jackson. And they didn't play, up to snuff. So, when next time they say, oh, next man up, I just don't want to hear it. I really don't. Because it's not next man up. Yeah, theoretically it's next man up because you're putting another body in there. But there is a talent drop off. And I get it. Not everybody's going to be as talented as, everybody else on the team. For example, not every quarterback is Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen or Joe Burrow or, Bo Nix or whatever quarterback you want to name. Okay? But you at least want to have as little bit of a drop off as possible. And right now, the Giants just don't have that. So when these injuries pop up, now they're screwed because it's just the same rinse and repeat. They struggle. This happens, that happens. And look, it's not just exclusive to the injuries. There are guys on this team that their play, that their lack of action or their actions in some cases are strongly starting to suggest that they're tuning this coaching staff out. Guys are making business decisions. All right, there's a couple that I know of. I won't say who. You guys can probably figure it out. That it's pretty clear that there are business decisions being made. And, it goes back to what I've said to you before, folks. You could preach processes and stay in the course and all this great stuff, this rah-rah talk. But if it's not getting results, after a while, players are going to tune it out. They're going to say, look, it ain't working, so why am I bothering? And they're going to go and they're going to make decisions what they feel is best for them. Not all of them are doing it. I want to send a shout out to Brian Burns, who played his butt off. I want to send a shout out to Malik Neighbors, who dealing with that hip flexor injury. He played his butt off. Micah McFadden played well. I mean, there were guys that played well. Daniel Bellinger played hard. Tim Boyle, who didn't even have any practice reps with the receivers in the first team, he came in and, oh, wasn't it nice, by the way, to see a quarterback finally throw in anticipation? I almost forgot what it looked like. It's been so long that we've seen it. So there are guys that step up. There are guys that still care and who are trying their best to make something out of what is basically a lost situation. But it's not everybody. And, I've had players tell me on and off the record that there are guys that they're concerned about, without mentioning names again, that there are effort issues with some people. And you can kind of see it, I mean, I don't know who they're trying to fool, these guys, but you can kind of see what's going on. And it just kind of leads me to my next point, and that is getting real with the current regime of Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen and whether or not they deserve to be back next year. So I'm going to take a quick break, and then when I come back, I'm going to talk about that with y'all right after this. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. Life gets so busy sometimes that we forget to say thank you to the people in our lives that make it so much better. But there's another person we don't thank enough, ourselves. It's sometimes hard to remind ourselves that we are trying our best to make sense out of everything. And in this crazy world, that's not always easy. That's where therapy can help with learning to pace yourself and to cope with all that life throws at you. And if you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule. Fill out a questionnaire and get matched with a licensed therapist. And if you find your assigned therapist isn't a match, switch at any time for no additional charge. Don't skip therapy day. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. It's that time of year. The college football playoffs are back. And with the newly expanded 12-team format, it's guaranteed to be bigger and better than ever, bringing you all the hard-hitting and high-flying excitement that you love. TNT Sports' coverage of the college football playoffs begins December 21st. starting with the college football playoff kickoff show presented by AT&T at 11 a.m. Eastern. Leading into our first matchup, the Southern Methodist University Mustangs battling the Penn State Nittany Lions at noon. Then, the Clemson Tigers look to upset the Texas Longhorns in a showdown at 4 p.m. Eastern. Don't miss a moment of the action. Watch the college football playoffs presented by Allstate live on TNT, True TV, TBS, and Max. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. And coming up this week, I hope to have a guest on the program. I spoke to this person in the press box on Sunday, and I invited this person to come on with me. This is somebody, I'll give you a hint, it's a former player. It's a former Giant player from that you'll recognize if he comes on. I mean, right now he's tentatively scheduled to come on with me for my Wednesday show. So that's coming up. And then, of course, got to continue with Crossover Thursday. This week I'll have Aaron Freeman, who will probably talk about Kirk Sember, I think is what he calls it now, Kirk Sember. He's all up about Kirk Cousins down there in Atlanta. So he and I will be doing the Crossover show. And then we will, of course, continue to fill in the programming here on the Locked On Giants podcast. All right, folks, let's get real, all right? Now, those of you who have followed me, who have listened to me, who have read my work, I have tried my best to be fair, to be open-minded, and to try to see reasons why the Giants should stay the course with Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen. You know, I acknowledge the injury situation, the quarterback situation. You know, I mentioned some of the depth issues. But here's the thing, folks. Who's kind of responsible for all that stuff? You know, Joe Schoen, by sticking with Daniel Jones this year, instead of really, you know, taking a flyer on a quarterback last year. And if you remember, I was pounding the drum for them to get a quarterback. If not in the first round, get a quarterback somewhere. Even if it was just a developmental project that, you know, if it didn't work out, you move on from. So this way, if he did work out, then he would have a year under his belt, and he would maybe be a bridge or maybe even the next starter. And they didn't do it. Whose fault is that? It's not my fault. It's not your fault. It's the decision maker's fault. So now what happens? Now, if they are retained, Schoen and Daboll, they got to get a quarterback. All right? They almost have to guarantee that they are going to draft a quarterback. And you're going to sit there and tell me that the top 2 or 3 guys in this draft class are on par with the talent that was in last year's class. All right? Now, let's just, you know, let's play devil's advocate here. All right? Drake May, Jaden Daniels, they were off the board. Caleb Williams was off the board. So can we sit here and say that Shedeur Sanders, that Jalen Milroe, that Cam Ward are on par or better than Bo Nix or, you know, Spencer Rattler, the guys that went off the board after the Giants drafted? I don't know that we can. So the Giants are now in a situation where instead of having a prospect that they could have developed, that they could have, you know, put out there, given how the quarterback situation died, they seem to put all their eggs in the basket of Daniel Jones. It didn't work out. Now all of a sudden we're on revolving quarterbacks. The Giants with having Tim Boyle play today. And by the way, Tim Boyle didn't look that bad. The numbers don't show it, but Tim Boyle actually showed that he could throw with anticipation, something we haven't seen in ages. But now, for the first time since 1992, the Giants have had 4 quarterbacks in a regular season game take snaps. 4. That's crazy. That's just crazy. And it just shows that this team has a glaring hole. The pressure is now on Joe Schoen to fix it. And I want to stay on Joe Schoen for a minute. Okay? Going back to the bye week, what did Joe Schoen tell everybody that kind of made us go, huh? He said that this franchise was close. Do you think it's close? Because I sure as heck don't. You know, He was talking about, the foundation, Tyrone Tracy, Malik Neighbors, Theo Johnson before he was hurt, Dexter Lawrence, Andrew Thomas, Brian Burns, Kayvon Thibodeau. I guess that's what he was talking about when he was talking about being close. But you know what? They don't have depth on the offensive line, young depth that's in the pipeline. Their defensive line depth is not very good. Their defensive backfield depth is not very good. They don't have a quarterback, which is a huge problem. They ain't close, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sorry, they're not close. Yeah, they have a foundation, but they're not close to being anywhere near a competitive team. All right, injuries aside, and that's a whole nother story. If you were that close, you would have guys that can maybe fill in some of these gaps. They don't have that, and it's hurting them. So, and sitting here and thinking, okay, should Joe be allowed to continue onward? There's two thoughts to that. Number one, you could say, well, let him continue adding to, the foundation. The other school of thought is, well, every GM technically, when he comes onto the job, hires a new foundation. So why not give it, turn it over to another guy and see if he can't build it up. Build it up the right way. Because, as I've said on this show before, they've let talent walk out the door. They've let leadership walk out the door. And this team is just stuck in a vicious cycle right now with absolutely no sign of coming out of it. Now, let's talk about Brian Daboll. Again, I can see merit in bringing him back. But the biggest thing for me is, okay, you're this quarterback guru, and you couldn't fix Daniel Jones. You couldn't get him back to being the 2022 version that we all saw. What went wrong? Why did Daniel Jones regress in 2023 and then again in 2024? That's one thing. You look at some of the play calling. I'm going to point to the fourth down play call in today's game as the latest example. So you go out and you put Eric Gray on the field, which was a dead giveaway that they were going to do a quarterback sneak because Eric Gray is just, I don't think they've trusted him much with short yardage. So then you ask Tommy DeVito, who is your shortest quarterback, to run a sneak, and he gets stopped. You don't think the Baltimore Ravens knew that play was coming? I knew it was coming. Okay, if I knew it was coming, they had to know it was coming. And then Daboll, flips the lid, pops his cork because the play didn't work out. Well, duh, some of the play calling is just beyond head scratching. There are times when Daboll does call a good game. Hasn't happened a whole lot lately. So, you can make a case to bring him back, but with each loss piling up, with each loss looking worse and worse, it's getting harder and harder to justify bringing those two back. Now, at the end of the day, what does John Mara think? What does Steve Tisch think? Do they believe what Daboll and Schoen are telling them, that they are on the right path, that they are closer than what the results would indicate? Well, didn't the great Bill Parcells say you are what your record says you are? And right now, what's the Giants' record? 2-12? They are legitimately in danger of losing every single home game. They've got one more home game, thank goodness, and they are in danger of losing it. That's not being close. And I don't know if that was just Shane talking to convince himself, if he was trying to sell, a bill of goods. But this team right now is a mess. And, look, if you want to make a case for making a change, you could say, okay, look, the team's a mess. You bring in all these, new head coach, new GM, and you start from scratch. The drawback, as I've said before, is that these guys that are in their prime, the Burnses, the Thomases, the Lawrences, it's going to be another year or two at least before they get, before the the franchise gets built up to where maybe it's on more solid footing, which is why I don't think Joe Schoen is in any danger of losing his job. I don't know that I could say the same for Brian Daboll at this point. I have a feeling, though, he's still back. I tend to lean towards him returning, though, again, I can't say that for sure. But look, something's got to give, and we got to be realistic here. The Giants are not close, as Joe Schoen suggested. I don't want to hear about injuries because every team's got them. Every team. All right? Every team that has injuries has depth. This team does not. That falls on the decision makers, plain and simple. That falls on the coaching for not getting these guys up to snuff. You know, you got to hear Tim Boyle say in his presser, "Oh, I haven't had any reps with the ones in practice. This was my first time throwing to the receivers at all." Come on. What does that tell you? You know, what are you sitting there and you're saying, "Gosh, I hope Tim Boyle never has to play"? Shouldn't you prepare for that? So, you know, just really, really disappointing. And it's just getting so much harder to defend the current regime. You know, I really want to see them do well because, like I've said before, I like Joe, I like Brian. I think they have an idea what they want to do. It's just their execution, much like the teams, has just not been very good. And that's got to change. And, you know, at this point, if you can't figure out how to make it work, get somebody in here who can figure out how to make it work. All right, folks, coming up next, some final thoughts on the Giants' latest loss. So please don't go anywhere. Hey, Giant fans, get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more all on the very same page where you place your bets. Visit FanDuel.com to get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, and some final thoughts on what has just been an absolute exhausting, mentally and physically exhausting Giants season, a frustrating Giants season. Just, I have no more words. I feel like every week I come on here after a game and I say the same thing over and over because I just don't know what else to say. How many different ways can I say this team is in a bad state? You know, and you guys know me. You my everydayers know me. You know I tend to be optimistic. You know I try to look on the bright side of things, but I just can't. I can't do it anymore. This team, they're not competitive. The processes that they have in place are not working. The talent that they have, I mean, you know, I hate to single guys out, but where was Kayvon Thibodeau today? I don't think he dented the stat sheet until about 11 minutes left in the game. How does that happen? It shouldn't be happening. What exactly is going on? Are guys making business decisions, or are they just, you know, are they not fighting? I don't know the answer. But when I see things like that, you know, I see missed tackles galore. You know, the opening kickoff, there was a couple missed tackles on that big opening kickoff by the Ravens. And thankfully, the Giants, I think, got a turnover on that drive. Not that it mattered, because the Ravens would go on a scoring fest later in the game. You see the same mistakes. How many illegal shifts do we need to see? Is it really, you know, necessary to have false starts when you're playing at home and you know the snap count? And Evan Neal, I'm looking at you, my friend. These are all things. You know, this isn't like, okay, a little hole opens up in the ship and you plug it with your finger. And then, oh, another hole opens up. Then you move, you know, this one's plugged. You got to plug it this one. This is a full-scale big hole in the ship. And there's just no plugging it. The ship is sunk. The season is down the drain. Okay, there's 3 more games left. Atlanta, Indy at home, and then Philly on the road. And I fully expect Philly to put their backups in because I think Philly, if I'm not mistaken, has clinched the playoff berth. And I bet their backups are still better than what the Giants have. Okay? Which would prove my point about getting the backups better or getting them ready. Which, I wonder what the Giants are doing. What are they doing? Because it's just not quality football. And it's frustrating to watch. It's frustrating to write about, to talk about. I feel for you guys, the fans, because it's something you guys used to look forward to. And now I see people say, I could care less. I don't want to listen to the show, or I don't want to read the stuff. I'm going to do something else on Sunday. I don't blame you. I don't blame you. If I didn't have to work, I might do something else on Sundays too. But this is where we're at. And, I can't sit here and say, well, it's going to get worse before it gets better, because right now it's about as bad as it can be. And, it's going to be interesting to see if ownership makes a change. Again, if I had to take a guess, even though I think, we're at the point where they really got to give some serious thought here. If I had to guess, I think Shane stays. Daboll, I'm growing less and less certain about. So, we'll see. It'll be here in about 3 weeks. All right. Could something happen this week? Sure it could. Will it? I don't think it will. I don't think, what would it serve at this point to fire anybody? Who are you going to plug in? You're going to promote Kafka as your head coach? You're going to, if you were to get rid of Shane Bowen, for example, you're going to make Andre Patterson your DC for the last 3 games? Is that really going to matter? At this point, the Giants are in a race with the Las Vegas Raiders for the first overall pick in the draft. And you know me, folks, I don't believe in tanking. But at this point, this team needs all the help it can get. And if it can get the first pick in the draft, that means it'll have the first pick on day 2, which would be a very coveted spot. And who knows? Maybe, just maybe, they will start to find the necessary pieces to fill this gaping hole that has developed in this franchise. Because right now, this team is just not watchable. And it's a darn shame, because you do have guys that are giving every ounce that they have, that are playing through injury, that are, taking the right approach and getting ready and studying and doing all the things you would expect from your football players to do. And it's just not coming together, and it's so unfortunate. It really is. So, all right, Giant fans, that's going to do it for this edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, this ranting, venting, therapy session, whatever you want to call it. So as always, I do appreciate you tuning in. One of these days, we'll have some good news to talk about. We just got to hang in there, folks. But thank you for spending part of your day with me here on the Locked On Giants podcast, and I will see you tomorrow.